Hello and welcome to North Country Matters. My name is Donna Seymour. I'm a member of the St. Lawrence County branch of the American Association of University Women, one of the civic partners for this show. Today we're holding a conversation with Alex French. Alex works at Clarkson as a sustainability officer, and he is going to talk to us about the Climate Smart Community Program here in New York State. Alex, thank you so much for coming in. You and I have been spending some quality time together at the Potsdam Town Comprehensive Plan meetings the last few weeks because those have been going on, and so this will give us an opportunity to dive a little bit deeper into the Climate Smart Communities Program. You've been assisting the village and the town in their efforts on those, right?
Yep, and the comprehensive plan, we're using the Climate Smart Communities, some of their action items to kind of evaluate the whole process of the comprehensive plan. So that's been nice to have that embedded.
That's been a good guide for some of these efforts. I did a little bit of homework on this, and I was surprised to learn that the Climate Smart Community Program actually was the result of an executive order back in 2009 by then Governor David Patterson. It feels like this is something that we've been talking about a lot lately, but it's actually a program that's been around for a while, hasn't it?
Yeah, I think it goes back to when New York State got into the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative with 9 or 10 other Northeast states that have a proper carbon market involved, and the whole mitigation efforts.
And actually, Virginia's talking about joining that now as well, so it's already expanding a little bit beyond just the Northeast. And Governor Cuomo has been talking a lot about this, particularly since Hurricane Irene in 2011, which was followed by Superstorm Sandy in 2012. So getting New York State sustainable, prepared for meeting these challenges has been pretty high on his agenda. Why don't you start with talking about the goals of the Climate Smart Community Program, Alex, so people understand what the initiative is designed to do?
So with climate change, there's usually it breaks down into two separate broad goals. One is mitigation, so reducing your greenhouse gases, and the second is adaptation or resiliency, so that you're changing in response to or in preparation for climate change. Clarkson signed a similar commitment, and at first it was just a greenhouse gas, sort of a carbon neutrality commitment that we're going to start measuring our emissions and then pick a date at which point we're going to be able to offset or have reduced all of our emissions. And they updated that because the whole conversation around climate change is changing from the idea of, we need to worry about our greenhouse gases to, the climate's already changing quite a bit, so how do we get ready for that right now? Because we're seeing so much more precipitation. We're seeing already about 8% more precipitation in the Northeast than as compared to the 70s through 90s. So that's going up. We're seeing, the snow cover days are dropping right off. So with that, we're getting more ice. So if you think about the ice storm of 98, if that's a 100-year storm, now let's start expecting that those sorts of things are going to be a 10-year storm. And, having hurricanes come up through the Adirondacks, it didn't happen before, but it's happening, and it's not abnormal. Even this winter, when I was a kid, and even when I first came up to Potsdam in 2004, we get accumulation of snow, but now every year we get a whole bunch of great snow, and then it melts, and then it turns into ice, and we get a little bit more snow, and then it melts, and it's gone. And we have a month less snow cover in Potsdam than we had in the 70s. So it's already changed so quickly. So now, in regards to floodplains, in regards to, ice storms, and, if the power goes out for 2 more weeks like it did in that last big ice storm, in the 98 ice storm, I think it was out for about 2 weeks.
It depended on where you lived. It was anywhere from about 5 or 6 days to 3 weeks, depending how far out in the country you were. So it was definitely an event that when the power companies came in, they got the population centers back on as fast as they could, but it took a lot longer to get the rural places on. So it was definitely, dependent on where you were, how long you were affected.
Right, and so that's how the Climate Smart Communities is set up, is that, we need to look at our emissions, but we also need to look at our, our operations and how do we change, because it's all changing.
And it's not just universities who are getting together to do this kind of work. A lot of mayors across the country have also begun to work on this because they know that when these things happen, their population is affected, and they can't just pretend that it isn't going to happen, because clearly it is. So we've got the reducing the greenhouse emissions, which also has a side benefit of lowering energy costs for municipalities, doesn't it?
Right, it makes sense financially. If you switch to LED lights, there's a quick return on investment.
Yeah, that was my big energy move last year, a year ago this time, was to change all the lighting in the house, and it certainly did make a difference, just on a residential basis. So thinking about that on a wider basis.
Yeah, but you're right. It's not just communities like the climate smart communities, or it's not just colleges. This program is specific to New York State municipalities.
Right. And one of the things that I found interesting is that the Climate Communities program is not just something that the Department of Environmental Conservation sponsors. There's actually 6 different agencies that are involved in this, so they're approaching it from a variety of fields and a variety of disciplines, aren't they? So, and that's the Energy Research and Development Authority, the Public Service Commission, the Department of State, the Department of Transportation, and the Department of Health. And one of the things that we know is that when these extreme weather events happen, there is a huge impact on public health, not just during the event, but sometimes for a long time afterwards. So that's a pretty good group of people to have on your team, isn't it?
Right. Yeah, I feel like what's good for the ecosystem is good for the human bodies.
So how does the community get involved and start the process to become a climate smart community, Alex?
So it's a really nice framework that DEC has come up with, and it's first the village and the town, they've both signed a resolution with the 10 pledge elements that the Climate Smart Communities program is kind of organized into. So the village and the town did that. Professor Eric Bacchus and I went and presented to both of those boards and just showed them that this is available, and Potsdam's doing a lot of these efforts already, so we may as well, so it made sense for us to fit into this framework. So that's step number 1. After that, what we're working on now, it's still pretty early for Potsdam, is putting together a sort of task force, is what they call it, a Climate Smart Communities task force. And that's where you're going to bring stakeholders together and try to start knocking out some of the different tasks. When you look at the 10 different pledge elements, it breaks down into about, I think it's 130 different action items that you can take. And not every action item is going to be fitting for every municipality, but it's a nice way to look at it, and they've highlighted ones that are kind of important first steps for every community to take. Yeah.
Well, if we take a look at the map behind us, actually Potsdam is one of several communities here in St. Lawrence County. The city of Ogdensburg, the village of Canton, and the village of Norwood, as well as the town and village of Potsdam are in it. You can see there's about 100 communities that have already started this process, which is a pretty good number for a state like New York, and there are several counties that are also doing it. So hopefully this process will continue to grow, and you'll see it grow at the county level as well as including more towns and villages and cities.
Yeah, absolutely. There's good carrots involved too. So if you're working towards this, there's grant money that you can get if you're registered and if you're working towards your certification.
And what makes sense to me is that this is a bottom-up grassroots process, because we know our community best. So it's easiest for us to do the assessment and then figure out what makes sense to take the next steps along that checklist, doesn't it? Yeah. So the state has given us a nice blueprint, and it's a 2-sided sheet, and literally it is a checklist. It's a wonderful document. There's all kinds of great ideas and tips on that. So let's talk a little bit, Alex, about what some of the elements of the checklist are and how communities can use the checklist to start this process and make some good efforts.
Well, you'd start off. I guess you'd start off with their high priority actions, and I circled them on mine. And it's getting your group together so that they can come up with those decisions. But one of the first things you do is create a greenhouse gas inventory and emissions reduction targets, which are great to do anyway, because then you're, like you said before, you're saving money at that point. and audits of local government buildings, greenhouse gas inventories for the community as well as for the municipality directly. And then, so it's all this sort of planning stuff. And the other part is a vulnerability assessment, and that's where we're gonna, for the North Country, our big natural hazard is probably an ice storm.
Right.
So that's where we would, what infrastructure is vulnerable there? Can we relook at our floodplains and see what housing and what zoning we can improve as far as like increased precipitation goes, and culverts and infrastructure, where are we vulnerable?
I remember a few springs ago there had been a lot of snowpack which began to melt quite rapidly. There was a lot of spring rain, and the rivers up and down where all the hydro dams are, there was a lot of pressure to let water down, and one of the things they were concerned about, because there were some problems at the Colton Dam in one particular area, and they were looking at the floodplains, because if any of those dams let go, it's going to have a cascading effect all up and down the river for all those other communities. So looking at floodplains is pretty important when you're talking about these 100-year events, which may be coming every few years with excessive rains.
Yeah, if you were to look at, Houston just had that horrible hurricane going through, and that was much more severe than a 1 in 100 storm, but that was the third year in a row where they had a 1 in 100-year storm or worse come through. So like, for them, not even once every 10 years, it's happening every single year.
And they don't get a chance to rebuild before the next cycle hits them again. So it's a cascading effect that really builds up in a hurry. So we those assessments are important. When those assessments are done, it's going to extend far beyond just the town and village buildings that they own. They're going to be looking at lots of different structures within the community, correct?
Yeah, I would imagine so. So if they're looking at our wetlands as a valuable resource, if we protect our the ecosystem, like the actual wetlands around it, then we have a little more capacity to absorb some of the flooding, for example. Then they can we're a little more resilient, they would say, to it, because there's that sponge on the outside of the development that can hold the water and slow the water down before it comes through my basement.
And here, exactly, and my basement too. And here in the village, they're actually working on refurbishing and strengthening the runoff system, because that's one of the oldest parts of our water infrastructure, and it's been deteriorating obviously for a long time. So rebuilding that is a big part of just helping to take care of these storm runoffs when we have these big events.
Yeah.
So it's kind of a multi-phase project, isn't it? Because it isn't just creating sponges, it's also being able to direct that water away when it comes down in a huge deluge.
Right, and then the Climate Smart Communities grant program, that's one pool. Now that we're registered in the program, we could apply for stormwater management.
Those kinds of monies,
projects.
That's really important.
Yeah.
One of the pieces that I think a lot of people will be interested in, Alex, is increasing the community use of renewable energy. We've seen a couple of solarized projects come through. A couple 3 years ago with Solarized Canton. Last year it was Solarized St. Lawrence County, getting residential areas people in residential areas to put up solar power on their homes. And Clarkson's got that big solar project that they did out at the airport. So those are the kinds of things that this will also be looking at, isn't it?
Yeah, and Professor Bacchus, when he was presenting to the village, he said, look at you're working towards getting the hydro dam refinished, and that's we have a lot of water, electricity. We have a lot of hydropower up here too.
That we could be utilizing if we ever get that dam, the parts and pieces. That has been an ongoing project for a long time. Another area in terms of the community use of renewable energy is also people energy, and that's where the Complete Streets project comes in, doesn't it, that program?
Yes, so, I don't know as much about that.
Okay.
That's again.
Well, I know I was chatting with some folks from Canton on a previous show, and they talked about making sure that it's a walkable and bikeable community. I know here in the village we have 10 miles of sidewalk, but it still doesn't cover every street in the village. So those are things to work for as well, because this is a very walkable village in in many ways. And that's part of it is because, of course, it's old. So that was how people got around, you know, back in the 1800s. Another area of the project that I think people will be interested in is recycling and solid waste management. That's a pretty big part of any expense for a community, isn't it?
Right, and that's another place where there's a nice opportunity for partnership between the universities and the community, is that we started, inspired by Potsdam signing this pledge. We had a student do an independent research. Brooke Zeller was her name, and she was looking into, you know, the feasibility of a community composting facility similar to what they have over at Canton, where the Village of Canton and SLU work together, and they make all this great compost that then a bunch of people from Potsdam might go over and borrow, and that we could be doing that here in Potsdam. And so right now we have 4 or 5 engineering students trying to look into, you know, dive in a little deeper, picking out 1 or 2 of the sites to look into the feasibility of what that would take. So then we would get points here that would work towards the certification.
Right.
Yeah.
And so that's a beautiful use of resources that are in the community, which are the colleges and the engineering students, and it's giving them a real world task to work on, isn't it?
Yep. I'm really excited. Pretty sure that for next semester, our honors program, they're gonna take on the climate smart communities a little more holistically. I think it's maybe 40 or so students, and they're gonna get into some of this assessment work, and maybe they'll pick out a couple parts to really dive into. But probably around 40 students, if I remember correctly, from our honors program will look at this for a full academic year. So really take a deep dive.
That's a huge resource that a lot of communities who don't have a college obviously don't have access to that, but it really leverages one of our big strengths, which is our academic institutions here in Potsdam.
Yeah, and I think this is one nice way that Clarkson could give back.
Right. That's good. So we talked a little bit about reducing greenhouse gas emissions, and we've talked about some of the other pieces. Let's talk about the community resilience piece. How do you see this process helping us to become a more resilient community?
So that goes back into the, you know, if you're to look at the action items that you have up here, then if we were to update our floodplain management plan and update our maps a little bit, if we were to, again, another Clarkson project is looking into a microgrid. That would be maybe one of the big projects that you could do. So then the microgrid, for people that aren't familiar with that, so you've got an ice storm that takes out all the power lines, and then you're not very resilient, not able to adapt. Luckily in the North Country, a lot of people have, you know, generators, and they have
wood stoves and backup systems.
Yeah, and they've got a food pantry, and they're ready for it. But on a community level, you should be prepared for, I think they say 2 or 3 weeks. So if you have, so this concept would have an underground line going from different generating sources around the community, like the hydro dams, connecting one bank, one pharmacy, wastewater treatment, a grocery store, so people can still get their medication if you can't, you know, easily get in and out of the area. People can still use an ATM. If you look at Puerto Rico right now, that highlighted the need for microgrids when they got hit so hard with the hurricane recently. So if they had, you know, they had people that needed ATMs, they had people that needed food, they had people that needed medication for diabetes,
everything,
whatever it is. So then that's the result. You hook it up to generating sources, you hook it up to a shelter, you hook it up to and then these crucial services that the community needs. So that would be that'd be a great thing for resiliency for Potsdam.
Right. And one of the things that we saw during the ice storm, which fortunately happened between the semester breaks in the winter, because if we'd had an additional 5,000 to 7,000 students in the community, it would have been very difficult to get through as well as we did, simply because of numbers. So thinking ahead, planning ahead on this is a good idea, because you can't predict when the next storm is going to hit, and it might be at a time when you do have a peak population instead of a smaller population. So those are all the kinds of things that need to go into into the planning, aren't they?
Right, absolutely.
Yeah, so I think the microgrid concept is very interesting. One of the things that we learned through the ice storm of 1998 was, and it was hard to tell when you were in the middle of it, but how widespread it was. I can remember talking to a friend who lived in California who said, I said, I can tell you what's happening on my street, but I really can't tell you what's happening in the whole area. And he began to describe for us how widespread that was, and when the resources began to pour into the area, we had power crews from every state in the union coming here, many of whom were not prepared for ice storm conditions weather-wise, because they were coming from southern states. But it was interesting because now what we're seeing with the way the storms are going now, these storms are they're taking out wide areas, and it's hard to pour resources in. If you don't have what you need inside your area, it may take a long time to come in from the outside. So that has to be part of the resiliency planning, is sheltering in place as a community and making sure you have pre-positioned things, and you have things like microgrids so you can keep essential services up and running.
Yeah, and one of the big voices in the whole climate conversation right now are insurance companies.
Right.
Right, and some of them have started requiring the cities and villages, if they're gonna keep their insurance, that they have to go through some of this resiliency planning, because they're getting too many. Their claims over time have been going up so much as a result of this.
I can remember having a conversation with an insurance adjuster several years ago when a straight line wind came through Potsdam, and it took off. It didn't damage our house, took off some shingles, and it took quite a while for the gentleman to get there. And he said, listen, I have had a lot of calls. I'm sorry I didn't get here 2 weeks ago. And I said, it's not a problem. Our roof wasn't leaking. But I asked him about that, and he said, we're seeing, as a company, we're seeing storms that are more violent in terms of the amount of energy that's released. They last longer, and they cover a larger area. So those are three things that our insurance company has noticed, and that's clearly the message that the insurance industry is now sending out, isn't it? That there's no denial about what's happening in the climate on the insurance industry, because it's costing them money.
Right.
So those, I think, are the kinds of clues as a community that we should take and say, if this is what the people who insure us are worried about, we should be worried about it too. So, describe a little bit for folks, Alex, the point system that is used. I mean, everything has a value, but how many points do you have to get before you hit the magic climate smart community goal? Or is it something you have to get points in each of one of the sections? Not, you can't just max out in a couple sections, right?
No, it's I don't know if I had that one on here, but I think it was around 120 points, but I don't remember out of how many points. But it doesn't matter out of which section you do it from. It's whatever fits best for the community. Is, like you're saying, a little more community oriented than that.
Right.
But this is sort of the laundry list of all the things that a municipality could easily do that would be more environmentally conscious, and then you pick out what is the most cost effective from labor and money.
And some of these things, as you say, we may already have done simply as part of the normal course of business in the community, so it's pretty easy to check those off, and then you start going towards the next set of goals that maybe aren't going to be quite so quick or quite so easy. How much of this requires cooperation? For example, street lighting. If we change our street lights to LEDs, is that something the community can do, or do we have to do that in connection with, for example, the power company or somebody like that?
I don't know enough about the details with that, but I know the village is already working on it.
Okay.
Right, and again, that was one of the reasons where it was easy for them to see this and be like, yeah, this already aligns well with what
where we're
need.
headed. Yeah.
So then, but yeah, I'm not sure how much work with the power. I know there's quite a bit that they have to do, but
I don't know either, but I know that it isn't always just a decision that you make. You've got to go out to some of these outside vendors that you may already be dealing with and get their cooperation on this. Correct?
Right.
Yeah.
And that's where the prioritization of the different actions is going to get shifted around a little bit.
So, and part of this is not just becoming a climate smart community, because once you do it, you don't just sit back and rest on your laurels, do you? You have to keep working at this, and you have to make a long-term commitment to continue to improve and to continue to, make these changes, right?
Yeah, if you want access to the grant money.
Yeah. Well, you know, that's all, as you say, that's a great carrot. So, in your work at Clarkson, is this a good fit for what you're doing out in your community as well, in terms of, is there quite a bit of overlap?
Between how Clarkson does.
And what you're doing for Clarkson, and now you're consulting at the community level as well.
Yeah, how Clarkson's helping. It matches really nicely. Clarkson, the more general higher education climate commitment. It's called the Second Nature is the name of the nonprofit who coordinates our climate commitment.
Okay.
And so it aligns really well, though, how there's the carbon element and then the resiliency element. So I think it's a good match for Clarkson. And just all my work. It's nice. It's interesting for me. I've been learning a lot about local municipalities and getting into this. A lot of this has been a learning curve for me. Yeah.
Well, I think it's probably been a learning curve for all of us. And one of the things I hope that will come out of this process is that it won't just be a handful of communities in the North Country. It will be a lot of communities who take a look at this and see that they're also vulnerable and that there are things that they can do. When we look at the list, there's not that many communities up here. There's nobody in several of our North Country counties. And so there's a lot of room for growth in this, isn't there, in terms of getting more communities to think about this?
Yeah, and it's a big undertaking, right, with this many actions and with money on the table and people wanting to do it well. And it's just, every winter people are reminded more and more about how real this is. And then, so one thing that's interesting that we're about to do is on March 10th we'll have Dazzle, and that's her real name. That's the director of the Climate Smart Communities program down in the DEC office in Albany. So Dazzle's coming up to Potsdam, and she's going to give a morning-long workshop for not just the town and the village of Potsdam, but people from Canton are going to be there. We're reaching out to climate smart people in Ogdensburg and some people who are interested who haven't signed on yet, like down in the Tri-Lakes area with Tupper Lake, Lake Placid area. So we're going to have people from the area come to Potsdam and get a better sense of this and get some more direct guidance from Dazzle about how to set up our committees that are going to work on these tasks and who should be on those committees and what different stakeholders we need to be effective.
And that's a good point. Let's talk a little bit about, if someone is interested in this, how open is the process going to be in terms of members of the community who really want to dive into all or part of this process?
Pretty open, I think. Fred Hans from the village, the planning guy here at the village, he had it go out in the North Country now that we're starting this work, and if you're interested to please contact him. And then I think from the town as well that if you're interested, at least reach out and we'll see what the need is, and then the town board members are going to be the ones. I'm involved with it, but I'm not a decision maker. Obviously, for the town, but I'm just trying to
actually, I've been attending the town comprehensive plan meetings, and that has been very interesting. The last of those three initial meetings are tonight, and that's energy and infrastructure, which is going to fit perfectly with this climate smart community work. Although we did talk a lot last time about economic development, because one of the things that becoming a climate smart does is it gives you opportunities for meeting those needs to create small business, doesn't it?
Yeah, and one of the pledges for one of the 10 pledges is support the development of a green, innovative economy. Yeah, so they have several actions that are just towards the new jobs. The new jobs,
exactly, and the new jobs that can't be outsourced because they actually involve making physical changes in your community. Yeah. So that's a good thing. So, Alex, as we wrap up, is there anything else that you would like to let people kind of as parting thoughts about this process know, and maybe some encouragement about how to move forward?
So I just think that there's a lot of work to do, so all hands on deck is important, and it's overwhelming if you look out at the world, but then let's just focus on Potsdam for a minute.
Right, and again, I think we have a vested interest, each local community has that vested interest in making it a sustainable and and a good place to live. And there's nothing about working on the climate smart communities that does not enhance your community and make it a better place to live. And it builds community because people begin to work together in ways that maybe they haven't thought about, and with people they haven't met who are all interested in the same thing. So it's a tremendous community building opportunity, isn't it?
Right. Even people that would politically differ in some ways, the actual action items that impact your local community, there's not going to be a lot of disagreement on things like that.
Yeah,
protecting
exactly.
natural resources and using energy that creates money and revenue for our community.
Right, and that brings in these, and those of us who went through the ice storm 20 years ago, this month actually, one of the things that I think we all took away from that was the sense that we went through that together as communities and as a region, and we came out of it because we leveraged those relationships, we leveraged our resources, and we made sure that everybody was taken care of. And it was a great opportunity to build community, and this is the same process without having to go through that kind of hardship.
Yeah.
So thank you for coming in, Alex. You've given us a real look at this process, and I hope people who watch this show will come away with a sense that this is something that they should be talking to their town leaders about and community leaders about, because there is no downside to this, is there?
There's not. Yeah,
There's
and
not.
if people from different municipalities would like to find out more about the workshop on March 10th, then they should, I guess we can leave a link or something so they can.
Okay, we'll make sure that happens.
Yeah.
Thank you. And we appreciate you coming in
Thank
today.
you.
These conversations are a production of North Country Matters, which is filmed here in the Fred W. Cleveland Computer Center of the Potsdam Public Library. This is a civic collaboration between the American Association of University Women of St. Lawrence County, the League of Women Voters of St. Lawrence County, and the Potsdam Public Library. Until next time, remember, our North Country Matters. Alex, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
That's a great conversation. Thank you.